Welcome back, everybody, into Bill's Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luca. Luca, we have a draft class in the books. We have some interesting undrafted free agents and mini camp invites we're going to talk about. We have a Sabres series that is going in a very good direction. How are you doing?
Couldn't be much better right now, Josh. Going to be pretty transparent on this one. We start this right after the Sabres absolutely beat the shit out of the Bruins in their own house, 6-1, 6-0 until the final minute when they just let up a softie shorthanded, but whatever. Life's good. Everything's good. You know, it's a beautiful Sunday. We're in springtime in Buffalo. Sabres are still playing hockey, and it looks like that will continue for a little bit longer than just a single series based on what we just saw. And then on top of it all, as you said, to lead it off, we have a Bills draft class wrapped up, ready to go to break down and kind of get excited about, because I do believe there's a lot to be excited about, even though it started in a very slow manner on Thursday night during our live show.
You mentioned how it started, and I had this thought today, and I never want to say everyone, because there tends to be a group think when you have a group of people like Bills fans online, and you tend to hear from the loudest ones. And I don't even necessarily agree with what I feel like the majority thought about this draft class, and we'll get into it. But I feel like the Bills' entire draft weekend basically followed the format of the 3-act play movie arc, where it kind of starts off just like a normal draft, like, normal life. This family, hey, they're living a normal life. They're getting the kids to school. They're going to work. Everything's normal. They're having a draft. And then all of a sudden, something kind of intriguing happens. And you're like, I wonder where this is going to go. That's the Bills trading down, accumulating all those picks. It's like, what's Brandon Beane cooking up? And then you get to the second act of the play, and that's when they start making real bad decisions, and they start putting themselves in situations that, how are they going to get out of this one? And that's day 2. And Brandon Beane's picking positions that you're like, that guy, that position? Don't we already have 2 of those? Do we need another one of those? What are we doing? And now you're feeling like, how are they going to get out of this mess? And then you get to the third act of the play, which is day 3. And all of a sudden the hero starts making the comeback, and it's good decision after good decision, and things start falling into place. And like most movies, where you think that, okay, now we're coming up on the happy ending, everybody's going to be happily ever after, and you think the movie's about to end, and you hit the pause screen on your Netflix, and you realize, oh, there's still 30 minutes left in this movie. That's Brandon Beane training down again in the 7th round and making the beat reporters stay for another 2 hours to cover the draft to see him take a punter and another offensive lineman. But that is my short read on how the draft went. Before we get into each pick and how it all went, you kind of said it at the outset. Overall, a productive draft class for this Bills, but what are your high overarching thoughts?
My high overarching thought, and really the way I look back at this draft, is it felt as if Beane essentially, and this is not literal by any stretch of the imagination, people want that on record, but it's like Beane essentially just took a nap for the first 2 days of the draft. And, and I even say that in a sense of, I don't hate the TJ Parker pick, and we'll obviously get into that more, but I say take a nap because it's like you're just doing the things you need to do, almost going through the motions a little bit. You took a very quality player in TJ Parker, you're just, as it fell into your lap at 35 eventually, so on and so forth, and move on with your day. And then day 3 came around. He woke up. He first makes a move that the fan in me is like, what the hell, because of what was clearly going to be the first pick to lead off day 3. And you can have your own opinions on McCoy, the player, and everything that's going on with his unfortunate health situation. But it's like, what the hell? And on top of it, you take a guard. But that's when Beane started really getting in his bag. And we will break that down. But holy shit, you look at that day 3 board and you see what the Bills did. And I genuinely believe at this moment right now, sitting here on April 26th, as right before we break it down, that I do believe it's realistic to think we will look back on this draft class in 3 years' time, which is a pretty good, appropriate time to look back into the class and evaluate it from there and say, that's the chunk that saved this. That's what made it a quality draft. These are going to be a lot of potentially impact names for this team moving forward that you can truly see a path for them being impactful, not necessarily right out the gate for some or most even, but eventually developing or filling the roster out in a manner that feels as if they have great opportunity in front of them to be impact guys for the Bills for years to come. So it's day 3, man, just the big picture look on this draft. Day 3 truly saved bacon, in my opinion, for a lot of things, because that day, you know, just to letter grade it, was an absolute smash A, in my opinion. It was phenomenal picks, great quality players. Like, not only did you get players at positions of need potentially, or places that you need to fill the cupboard a little bit, but you somehow found incredible value at every one of those steps. And that's when you can layer those things together. That's an incredible combination to ultimately make you view that you couldn't do much better, especially when you're at a point that everyone talks about it. Day 3 is more about dart throwing than anything else. So just quality day overall.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I was this excited about a day 3 of a draft. And I'm not doing this for the jokes. I was very excited when the Bills got Matt Araiza. I was excited about that pick. And some of these names I'm going to bring up, there was no day 3. There used to be day 1 was rounds 1, 2, 3, and day 2 was rounds 4 through 7. But I was excited / intrigued when they drafted Cardale Jones, and that obviously didn't work out. And then I remember in 2006, I was over the moon excited when they got Co Simpson in the 4th round, because he was a guy that could have been mocked, in the 1st round. And it's funny because they ended up getting one of the best players in their franchise history 1 round later in Kyle Williams. And yet it was Co Simpson that, got so much buzz and really saved the Bills bacon in that draft, because maybe somewhat similar to this draft. If you think of the group think we talked about, the Bills kind of fumbled the bag early, where they drafted Dante Whitner, who many didn't think of as being worthy of that high of a pick, and he had a fine career. And then they traded up for John McCargo, who nobody saw as a 1st-round talent, and he was out of the league pretty quickly. And then right after that, the Bills went value with like Ashton Yabudi and Co Simpson, guys who were mocked in the 1st round. So similar. And I think a lot of what day 3 is waiting for your team to pick, and then realizing I've never heard of that guy. Now I'm going to quickly Google him and get excited about him and try to find one of the 10,000 draft analysts that put something really positive out about him and cling to that. Well, I think if you followed this draft even somewhat closely, the Bills didn't have any of those I've never heard of that guy picks.
Yep.
The wide receiver we're going to talk about, Skyler Bell, was on everybody's radar. The linebacker, or is a guy that I think absolutely, if you follow in our linebacker show, we called him out as what a unique athlete, still kind of new to the position, but a guy that can rush from the inside, just like a jack of all trades. I even tweeted out from our account, I think 20 minutes before that pick, that because the Bills were getting ready to have 2 picks in a row, I tweeted out from our account that I really want the Bills to want Caleb Alarms Orr. And I don't know if they will, but I'd be intrigued if they were intrigued by his skill set and to have Jim Leonard thinking of ways to use him. And then, again, kind of struck gold again right before they made their next pick in the 5th round, tweeted out about 20 minutes before that saying, man, if you want to just have a lotto ticket scratch off and roll the dice on a high upside, super competitive player who's just scratching the surface of how good he can be, take a flyer on Jalen Kilgore, the safety from South Carolina. And that's what they did. It was just like, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a fun ride. Luca, as we break this draft down, though, I'm going to stick with that 3-act play as we break it down into segments. We'll get into each and every one of these players, but I kind of want to group them into their own little segment. So let's start with the period of the draft where the Bills didn't pick a player. But what they did was they accumulated value. And that was early in the draft. And I think there was mixed reviews on this. You and I were live on our live show with Stokes as the Bills traded down twice, ultimately trading out of the 1st round altogether. But as the math started coming out and you look at the various trade charts and you realize the Bills didn't just win those trades, they won them significantly and essentially erased the deficit of draft pick they lost in the DJ Moore trade, all to wind up at 35 with a player in TJ Parker, whether you like that pick or not, with a guy that nobody would have said anything negative about. Had you taken him at 26, that value would have made sense. Before the Parker pick, let's just talk about Thursday. you and I were totally on board with the trading down. I think particularly after that run of Casey Concepcion coming off the clock and the defensive end Lawrence coming off the board to the Cowboys right before the Bills picked. You and I were never super high on Omar Cooper Jr. And I think once the Bills came up at 26, there was nobody standing out that, oh, just get this guy. So I thought Brandon Beane, some of his best work in his career in the draft was maneuvering around, accumulating value, and still finding himself in position on day 2 to get a player that was very high on their board. So just the trades, Luka, what's your initial impression?
On just the trades, like you said, from a pure asset acquisition standpoint, I commend everything about it. I think everything about what Beane did, what the organization did in general, in making sure they recovered all of those things, because what I think is intriguing about the Bills overall, and why even it feeds into more so about the day 3 conversation I said about a lot of the players I like and everything that goes into that, is you need to fill the roster out a little bit more with potential dogs, and we need to see if we can find more, I will call them capped talent on this roster. And I mean capped in a financial standpoint. And you need to be creative in the way that you're finding these guys, because unfortunately for the Bills, you don't have just a plethora of cap space to use in the free agency market and get more proven commodities to fill those roles and holes on the roster. And when you look at the defensive side of the ball in specific, it was like clear as day, as anyone understands, the season ended in a manner that it did because the defense was just incapable of stopping Bo Nix and the Broncos, a team in which then the Patriots played the next week with a backup quarterback and held to almost no positive gain whatsoever for the entire 60 minutes in their house. So you found yourself in a situation where it's like you need to stock up more on defense on top of changing your defensive philosophy. So there's going to be a new thing for even the guys you currently have in house, and you need to just bring in bodies and see what you can do to revitalize the defensive side of the ball, revitalize the roster in general, and have, financially controlled individuals doing so to make sure you still maintain yourself under the cap. So when Beane made the move for DJ Moore and you found yourself in a position with, a couple less picks, it was, or I guess it would technically be one last pick in that situation. But overall, it's to recover what it is and then end up with the player you did, which also on top of it is someone that was mocked to them at your original pick in the first place. That's a quality, way to operate if you're Beane and everything. And I love everything about it looking back now and understanding kind of the thought process and everything like that, to be able to maximize everything within this year's draft and try to get as many potential roster fillers that you could get at a good salary that financially and asset control wise and everything like that, from a business standpoint for the Bills and a roster management standpoint for the Bills. I thought, Thursday night going into Friday was an overall big success for Beane and the Bills for everything they need to do with the roster.
So let's get into the second act of this 3-act play that was this draft. And that's where the Bills start drafting players. And we're going to group the first 3 players together that they picked. We're going to break them down individually, but I think coming into this draft, Luka, there was a very popular school of thought that the Bills, for really the first time in quite a while, could, even on day 2, draft people that could come in and start at certain positions. And the positions we're thinking about were inside linebacker, where you have Terrell Bernard coming off of an injury-riddled season, and Dorian Williams, and then nose tackle, where you have really nobody on the roster that fits that old school 2-gapping 3-4 nose tackle role. And I will just be honest, I think even you and I were seeing it a little bit differently when we started touching base after the first pick on day 3, where you're like, what the hell are they doing? I think you're probably with me on this. I never needed the Bills to use the first pick of their draft on somebody that had a chance to come in and start. Like I didn't need it to be an inside linebacker. And the one thing that kept sticking with me was, is that a glaring need? I think quite Obviously it is. Outside of Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard, really the only other linebacker they have on the roster is Joe Andreessen. But the thing I can't get out of my brain is, one, the good linebackers never get to a second contract with their new team. You look at Roquan Smith, you look at Tremaine Edmonds, you look at Devin Lloyd. They always either get a massive deal to go somewhere else because the team that's had them playing at a high level realize that even though they're great, they're not worth the investment. Or the team's just like, it's a linebacker, we'll find one. But look no further than the current crop of players that's still available to the Bills as we record this on April 26th. They could go out tomorrow and sign Matt Milano. They could go out tomorrow and sign Shaq Thompson. They could go out tomorrow and sign Bobby Okereke, excuse me. I still have Pat McAfee's voice in my head from when he announced the pick, that draft. And there's even, Jermaine Pratt, I think, is still out there too. There are answers out there that will be very cheap for the Bills, and I would expect them to get one of those guys after the comp pick formula date expires and it no longer impacts that. So I never needed the Bills to do that. I was a little more interested in the nose tackle, particularly McDonald, the player from Ohio State. But still, I liked McDonald because I thought he was more than a nose tackle. I think you and I differed in how we viewed him. I never wanted the Bills to spend their premium first or second or even third pick on a guy that's going to be a 20% of the snap, two-gapping, space-eating run stuffer that can't get on the field on third downs. That never made sense value-wise. And again, you could go out there and sign DJ Reader. I viewed McDonald as a guy that could come in and initially be that two-gapping run plugger, but ultimately grow into maybe a Vita Vea type person that can impact the passing game. And who knows who's right on that? We'll find out in 3 years. But that is a long way to say when the Bills ultimately made their pick and it was TJ Parker, it caught people off guard because not only is it an edge, which, okay, we have Chubb and Rousseau, but okay, I could see where maybe you want something that's different than that because these are guys that win with length and power and don't really get bendy and twitchy. When they drafted, TJ Parker, and he is of that ilk, and a lot of the comps he even got by draftniks was Bradley Chubb, I think a lot of people were like, what are we accomplishing here? We already have two of that, and now we have another guy like that. I hear that argument. I was more in favor of Lukas Guy Cassius Howell if the Bills were to go with that spot. But the position of edge rusher, I am totally on board with the Bills picking because I would rather swing for an edge rusher, even if it's not a starting need, over an inside linebacker when I can just go on the street tomorrow and find those guys. So for Parker, the pick, I didn't love the player because I think it's kind of a clone of what they have. I don't have to be right about that, but I didn't mind at all the position. I just said a lot. Your thoughts on TJ Parker, and feel free to talk about positional value, any of that stuff that was going through your mind on Friday and maybe even since as we've had time to think about it.
I think the TJ Parker pick overall is, as a player, is one that has grown on me as time has elapsed from the pick being made itself. And what I mean by that is I share a mind with you in the sense of when the pick was made initially, one, Cassius Howell is still on the board, and that is well documented. The individual I had on my brain as if we're going edge, which I fully accepted that there was the most likely scenario that we would, and I absolutely agree with that philosophy. I would prefer, as we've now said, both of us, to get something different in that department on the roster. And I sit there and I look at TJ Parker and I go, this feels, as you said, on the surface as fairly redundant to what is currently sitting here on the roster. It's not that he's a slow individual or that other guys in the edge department on this roster are slow themselves. It's just, it's not that true natural speed edge that an outside linebacker and a true 3-4 would normally provide. We don't have that individual that seems to fit that mold. And you had guys like a Cassius Howell sitting there potentially waiting to be that individual. But as time has elapsed and stuff like that with the player, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about TJ Parker. And realistically, when you think about TJ Parker as a player, he's an individual that if you go back and look at, and this is also for what it's worth, you read any mock drafts about next year's mock draft, don't put any weight into those players being where they are. Garrett Nussmeier, for instance, was projected to be a top 5 pick at this time last year, and he ended up barely being picked by the Chiefs late in the 7th round. But to the point that I'm trying to make here, 2 picks later in the PFF way too early mock draft, at 7 going to the Raiders in this mock, it was TJ Parker out of Clemson. He was a projected top 10 pick a year prior to the draft. That, someone like that being projected in a manner that way, there's clearly acumen, there's clearly depth to the player. So it made me go, okay, why was he projected so high? Why did he end up falling to 35? What's going on? And as you just look into the player more and more, I think the reason for dropping is less to do with the ceiling of the player and the capabilities of the player. It's just, I think in ways, it's almost like peaking too early, and then all of a sudden flashy new things come about. And then on top of it, you just get looked over because you know what this guy is, you know what he's capable of. Production may have dropped a little bit as well on top of it. And then all of a sudden there's other individuals that have come up and risen to the top of the surface now that are kind of the new look opportunity guys. I mean, in case in point, in those way too earlys, Caden Proctor was projected to be the first overall pick in this draft a year prior. He was not the first overall pick, if anyone knows. Fernando Mendoza was not on anyone's radar whatsoever. So there's just things that happen in here that eventually stuff changes. But TJ Parker is a quality player. And then as you look at things, you look at his Senior Bowl practices and appearance, I guarantee Beane and Joe Brady and stuff were at the Senior Bowl, saw the TJ Parker workout specifically on day 1, where he absolutely uplifted with a single arm bull rush on a 6'8", 300-pound lineman. And we're like, that's very interesting. I don't think we really have someone that's capable of doing that on our roster. And that could have struck them in a good way, that they were navigating from there. Everyone else within their scouting staff, they're like, what do you think about this individual? Well, how do you feel he could fit on this team? Do we believe he could be an outside linebacker for this team? And what I also find interesting enough, Josh, is the fact that TJ Parker was listed as a D-end edge on a lot of different things. It just naturally, if you look at, whether it's ESPN or NFL.com and stuff like that, or those secondary draft things out there that evaluate a little bit of a different depth, all of a sudden the Bills put out their draft tracker and image. If you look very closely, it says outside linebacker out of Clemson, TJ Parker. So what I love about that little detail right there is there's an idea exactly on how they want to use this player. And that, to me, might be the best feeling I could have. When you have the consensus about an individual is, hey, he's a natural D-end edge, and all of a sudden your team's like, we're going to list him as an outside linebacker. It's like, okay, there's an idea for this player. They've clearly circled him and understood what they like about him and what they want to get out of him, and that's why they ended up taking him with their first pick in the draft. That I'm definitely coming around on TJ Parker a lot compared to when it initially happened on Friday, this past Friday. And I think he's going to be someone that grows on me more and more as we get into the training camp season. And eventually it's going to be like, yes, now I understand. And I fully expect this to happen for what it's worth. Now I understand why they took him at pick 35. Now I understand why they added him to the edge group. And maybe he, along with, let's not forget Bradley Chubb, can complement Gregory Rousseau in that edge group on top of everyone else that's also there below Gregory Rousseau, as potentially finally solving that pass rush dynamic that has not been there from the edge position overall.
Yeah, and I do think it can be a logical fallacy and we're all guilty of it, particularly when your own team has done it. Like, oh, they drafted Rousseau. This is kind of how he reads, and he's limited as a pass rusher. Rousseau is a very productive player, but nobody's confusing him with like prime Von Miller as far as rushing the passer, to think that, oh, no power rushers can ever become elite. Trey Hendrickson is a power rusher, and he's proof that you can become elite. I mean, at the very highest end, J.J. Watt, I mean, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. So you never know what the path is going to be for TJ Parker. But then the Bills went on with their next pick. And I think this was the biggest stunner. And I think while people were, kind of middling on TJ Parker, where I don't, maybe he wasn't my favorite idea, but I get it. When the Bills did this, I think the fan base, a large portion of it, took a deep sigh, because it was Davison Igbinison from Ohio State, and the Bills call him and say his name is IGB. I am totally on board with that. So for the rest of this conversation, we're going to say IGB. It was the fact that the Bills took a cornerback and a particular type of cornerback that reads as a predominantly boundary cornerback that started to put people in a bad mood. And it was, we have specific needs that could come in here and start at inside linebacker, nose tackle. We just listed them, and you're taking depth. Now, I will tell you my own personal opinion. I always want my team to take the best player available. I don't want them to lean into need unless it's close, then go for need. I also love my team prioritizing the more expensive positions, the more premium positions, if you will. And I don't think it's at all close between cornerback and inside linebacker. But even as we get to the third pick, when they take the tackle, my issue here is folks saying the Bills are just trying to get a bunch of number twos. I don't see it that way. I think one of the biggest mistakes the Bills have done under Brandon Beane is last year. They just assumed Keon Coleman was going to take the next step and did nothing to insulate themselves with a plan B if he didn't. And then when Joshua Palmer got hurt, we were down to, okay, who's on the practice squad? And where would this team have been if Tyrell Shavers hadn't proven to be an NFL caliber wide receiver? They were digging into free agency. Curtis Samuel couldn't get healthy. So why am I saying that? And we're going to get to all these picks, but when you look at TJ Parker, I saw Uber Hansen. He's a guy that everybody's familiar with. If you're on Twitter, Bill's Twitter, he was like, it's not that the vision for these players confuses me. It's the vision, the players they drafted. It's the vision for these players on the roster. What does this say about Javon Solomon? What does this say about Keon Coleman? What does this say about Maxwell Harrison? And then when you get to the tackle, like, what does it say about Tylen Grable? My response to that is, it says that if these guys, Javon Solomon, Tylen Grable, whoever I just named, come into camp and show that they are ready for the moment and they are ready to take this starting job and our impactful job and be a great player for the Bills, that's fantastic. But it's also saying that we are not counting on that. We are trying to win a Super Bowl and we are going to have a plan B in house. And if we live in a world, Luka, where Javon Solomon turns into an impactful pass rusher, and oh, by the way, so does TJ Parker, that sounds fantastic to me. If we're living in a world where Maxwell Harrison becomes a shutdown cornerback and IGB also looks like somebody you don't want to keep off the field, that sounds fantastic to me. And that's when if I were Brandon Beane, would walk into Jim Leonard's office and say, find a way to make it work. I gave you a bunch of good football players. That's what every defensive coordinator wants. But what the Bills are refusing to do, and you could just tell by the times that Brandon Beane brought it up over and over again, is find themselves in a situation where when the season's on the line, they're going to practice squad defensive back who can't run Dane Jackson to cover Marvin Mims. And no, they didn't draft IGB in the second round and trade up to do him, to take him to do that, to have the same scenario. Like, okay, so next year when we're in Denver in the playoffs and our starter's out for a play, now we have IGB. That's not what they were thinking. But what they're thinking is, we have a Super Bowl caliber roster. They clearly like their roster, and they were just picking the best players available. And yes, their depth, in my opinion, is significantly better than it was before this weekend started. Competition is never a bad thing. So as they went edge and cornerback, we can get to tackle in a second. I was not unhappy with either of these picks. And the last thing before I kick it to you, you and I were kind of on cornerback being a need. I think we were in the minority, but you and I took a look at it and we were like, okay, if Harrison and Benford, who aren't exactly like the poster children of good health in their careers, were to miss some time, who are we looking at boundary cornerback? D. Alford, who's our starting nickelback, and then what? So right. The Bills took care of that with 2 swings at cornerback, 1 early. What did you think of the IGB pick?
From a positional standpoint, and I will start there, I like it. I like the idea. I like everything. I think everything you said is appropriate, because it's like, look, we don't need to be going back to the well for these, let's just call them washed up vets that aren't capable of really making a roster out of training camp. And yet, if you find yourself in a position when shit starts hitting the fan and stuff's not working out or whatever, the reason your cupboard is so barren is because you really haven't been doing this. You haven't been taking corners with a little bit more of higher picks. You took dart throws at like an Alex Austin once or whatever. And it's like, he's now playing for the Patriots in your division, somehow making it work out there. Not meaningful reps, but regardless, that's all you've really been doing to fill the cupboard at corner for a long time. What I will also add, though, is this might be one of my least favorite picks because of the individual, where I remember when I saw IGB picked, my first reaction was, is McDermott still our coach? Because he fits exactly the mold that seems to be the best case scenario for an IGB build. Tall, lengthy, cover 3 dominant zone type corner. Like, I was like, I don't grasp why this is all of a sudden a Jim Leonard style corner compared to what the previous regime was. And on top of it, his 2025 tape, is someone that unfortunately watches a decent chunk of college football. And unfortunately for all of us, Ohio State is pretty dominant on the airwaves there when it comes to being on TV. IGB was a lot of times the individual in 2025 that teams walked into the horseshoe or were playing up against them, that they would circle and go, hey, attack this guy. He's going to be grabby. He's not going to be fluid in his movement at all. He's not going to stick to you. Like, this is the person to attack, and they were rewarded for it. And I think there's something about the athlete that is IGB that is definitely enticing, and I fully grasp that concept. It's just, he's far from my cup of tea, for one, and two, it just, there weren't too many things other than just his height and arm length and stuff like that I'm like, yeah, this is why I love this individual. It's, he's not even a sub 4.4 guy, things like that I'm like, I initially off the pick, I was scratching my head, and I'm just like, I don't see why you're taking someone like this when, for instance, just to name people that were still on the board that were more of my style, would be like a Julian Neal out of Arkansas, these other guys that ended up going somewhere else, that it's like, I can understand why you would take him over IGB. That being said, I will say this. I had to almost check myself when I started telling everyone that, why the hell did we just draft Antoine Blake in the second round? Because it's like, at the end of the day, I don't know nearly as much as the individuals that have spent their actual living scouting and doing everything. And you bet your ass that I'm sure there were plenty of scouts scouting Ohio State games, especially on the Bills roster. They love to scout just down the road there in Columbus, and saw something in this individual. And Jim Leonard, I would imagine, is, he's being presented this guy, and it's like, this guy makes sense for what we need. And you're filling, like we talked about initially, you're filling the cupboard with young corners to hopefully not find yourself in positions for years to come where you are needing to sign a Dane Jackson off the street. You need to rely on Trey White to come back in and be something of serviceable for you. You need to bring in other guys here that can now potentially carve out 3-4 years on the roster and be useful if needed in any capacity. And I will just rest my head on the fact that I don't know shit as someone from the outside world, and what I believe in a player, or what I believe is not in a player, is not what matters. And that's how it is. And that's for anyone involved in this space. And it's like, they know what they're doing. I will trust, and they know what they're doing. And on top of all of it, it's just like, I hope it works, because I just, again, for it not being my cup of tea, this is truly going to be one where I have to wait before you buy me on it, or sell me on it. I love going at a corner. I think it's a great idea, but I mean, I honestly thought that they were even going to potentially get AJ Halsey here, a safety that they had brought in for a visit. There were other guys out there that could have also filled certain needs, that then you ended up going with IGB. And it was a bit of a scratcher in my opinion, but I will just, I'm not going to overreact to it. I'm not going to just sit here and call him Antoine Blake until week 3, when he randomly has to come on and gets absolutely torched and has like 14 tackles on the day because he's always getting beat and getting caught on. But I will let time pass before I come to that judgment, and not try to overreact to it. But from a positional standpoint, I agree with it. From a player selection standpoint, that's where the question mark's raised, but I will leave it at that.
My initial aggravation with the pick was not about the fact that it was a cornerback. I think it was more of the fact of, here we go again. The Bills are not taking their need at wide receiver seriously. And quite honestly, one of the players I was thinking about that was still available is Skyler Bell, who the Bills ultimately got 2 rounds later. Yeah. So I liked Brissell, the wide receiver from Tennessee. I liked him more than Bell in that spot, but he went shortly after that to Carolina.
Yeah.
And boy, they're just building like a bunch of similar receivers there. But whatever. I like. I'm with you. Like, was he my cup of tea as a cornerback? Not necessarily. I know that, if you think about when you build a wide receiver core, you're kind of building it like a basketball team where you have your big jump ball guy, and then you have your field stretcher, and then, it's like your point guard, and then you have your shooting guard, and then you have your center. So maybe the Bills are kind of reverse engineering that logic. And, they have their do everything guy in Christian Benford. They have their super fast, can run with anybody ball hawk and Maxwell Harris did. And now IGB gives them another guy that can come in and play man, but man press. And, can he develop the rest of his game? We shall see. But, to piggyback off of what Lukas said, we never pretend to know more than the team. We never would state that. But I also don't feel like that needs to be said as a caveat either. And there's a lot of pushback to people that do what we do in this space on draft weekend when we criticize a pick. Oh, you think you know more than the team? No, I sure don't. I don't have countless hours. I'm not being paid a 7-figure salary to scout these players. I'm just giving you my opinion from what I do know. And that's what makes this entire show what it is. That's what we do when we're giving you a preview of what's coming up with Bills Dolphins and why we think Devon Achane is going to be a scary matchup for them, or why we think the Bills can attack their secondary. But ultimately, we aren't spending 20 hours a day in the film room. We aren't talking to scouts about all these traits about all these players. So there's never we know more than the team, but that's still give us the leeway to disagree with what they do without taking it as far as, oh, you think you know more than the team. And that's really a Bruce Nolan argument. I saw him making it several times this weekend. But I echo that because it is kind of a frustration point. Okay, so in day 3, the Bills kicked it off. And I think this is where people were really starting to lose their mind a bit with Brandon Beane. And give me 1 second. I just had my list of Bills draft class. I had it up and then I brought it down. Okay, so in day 3, they take out of Boston College the tackle Jude Bowery. And I will tell you, I was not thinking tackle in this spot. The Bills clearly have Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown locked into long-term deals. I recognize the fact that they did lose Ryan Vandemark, and that is no small loss, in my opinion, to restricted free agency. And then we don't know what's going to happen with Chase Lunt. We don't know. And if we don't know if Tylen Grable is going to be ready to take the reins and stay healthy, that's been his big issue. Or B, is Tylen Grable going to end up winning the left guard spot? I wouldn't say he's the favorite right now. I think it's Austin Corbett or Alec Anderson, but excuse me. But I understand adding another name to the pipeline. And I think what the Bills were thinking about here, Luka, is one, maybe he's a guy that comes in and wins the third tackle spot. That's an important job for the Bills. We know that they take that third tackle very seriously. Look back to the Pittsburgh game when they played without Brown and Dawkins. They got through it and had one of their best rushing days of the year. Also, this is a guy that the Bills said they're going to start him at tackle, but they could see a future in his future where they move him to guard. And that's an important add-on to this story, because when you look at the Bills' future of the guard position, Alec Anderson, Austin Corbett, and Osiris Torrance, the big one, are all free agents after this season. So adding somebody that they obviously think high enough to the pipeline, though I would think if they took him that high in the 4th round, they probably had a 3rd round grade on him at least. This is a pick that they're obviously pretty excited about. Wasn't my favorite pick of the weekend by any means, but if the Bills feel this strongly about an offensive lineman that can come in and help them maybe a couple spots, then I get it. Although this is where I was really starting to feel you really do think you're just fine at receiver, don't you? Panic.
Yeah, this was definitely one where I was curious what the philosophy was. I will also add on to the point that you made and kind of what we're seeing here and what was made known very early on. As soon as that idea of they don't view him as just a pure tackle and that there is guard potential in this player that they view, that made a lot more sense to me, because as you said, the big one in quite literal ways with Osiris Torrance. That decision is going to have to be made soon on whether you're paying him, which is going to cost you a pretty good premium based on what guards are going for these days, young guards. And then also, everything else at that position being a little bit more unknown. Your bookends at tackle feel a little bit more settled, or at least in the near future, pretty solidified, of course. And then at center, you just recently paid your center to remain around for another few years, that you're good there, but you need to figure out the guard play. So as soon as they made that clear, hey, we do view him as potentially a guard possible player. And then when you hear that and you go back into his profile and you look that this individual was 98th percentile in vert and 97th percentile in broad jump and has big old hands with a quality 40 as well on top of it. Arm length is actually a little bit short as well. All these things kind of do smell like maybe this guy is kind of more of a guard anyways. He's a big guard, whatever you want to call it, that he could fit there. And if they view it that way, and maybe he has capabilities of being in that position, with that 5 even 40 or round up 5'1", but still that's not exactly slow when it comes to a man that is 6'5", 315 pounds. That's definitely it put me at ease, I would say, with that pick a little bit more. The frustration of not taking McCoy, who was openly said that they were not interested. It was clear as day that was going to be the top pick of day 3, and they moved back one spot just so they could still get their guy and maybe get a little bit of a future consideration that was a 7th round pick in next year's draft, just to do so that the Raiders could secure McCoy. Cool. You got a 7th round pick. That guy's going to turn into a future Hall of Famer. Mark it down here first. That's I get it, but also still a little frustrated they didn't go with that true ceiling play. You kind of had fall into your lap being the first pick in the 4th round, and then all of a sudden turn around and take Jude Bowery out of Boston College. No disrespect to him, it was just frustrating. But that I give props to Beane and the Bills to really put it at ease and be a little bit more transparent with how they viewed the player and what they viewed the possibilities were for the player. And truly when it's unprompted, essentially, that it's like, hey, we do view him as potentially a guard solution as well. It's like, boom. Okay. Now you've got me hooked here. It's like, that makes a lot more sense. Guard, tackle potential. You look for those kinds of guys. Obviously the Bills are someone that also very much value a swing tackle position. This could be an individual that fits that mold too. So I became sold at that point on this. And I'm like, if you didn't like McCoy and you didn't want to burn a year of him having another surgery that was very known at that point, you got who you believe to be your best value at a position that's potentially very needy in the near future if you're not going to be moving on with the very expensive price tag of Osiris Torrance and all 350 pounds of him. So I warmed up to this one very quick. I will be honest, not that I know too much about offensive linemen, but you look at measurables, you look at him, and there's a clear, decisive understanding of how they view the player. That is a positive sign to me from the outside of they have a real true script and idea as to why they did this and the direction of why they went with this player and what they have for his progression as an NFL player. That they sold me on it quick and they got me on board.
And I think we learned a lot about Brandon Beane this weekend. And since he and McDermott had been together since the 2018 draft, 2017 season, we could always just guess, like, okay, who's the one in the building that really prioritizes X, Y, and Z? Well, when they draft the defensive lineman with length and isn't necessarily a speed rusher, even though McDermott's gone, you can now look at it and say, oh, maybe that's a Beane thing. One thing that I think know for a fact about Brandon Beane, for better or worse, he is not going to leave himself shortchanged on the line of scrimmage. He believes that football is won or lost at the line of scrimmage. He has pumped endless amounts of resources into making sure that they have adequate or great starters and adequate depth on both lines of scrimmage. And I'm okay with that. I really am. Now, I know that they've, to a lot of us, gone overboard with 1st round pick on Rousseau, 1st round pick on our 2nd round pick on Epinesa, Boogie Basham, TJ Sanders, 1st round pick on TJ Parker, Ed Oliver, signing Von Miller, and all this stuff they've done. 3rd round pick on Harrison Phillips, just nonstop pumping it into the defensive line. And yet it always feels like a need. But That's his philosophy. That's coming up under Dave Gettleman. Dave Gettleman's the guy that was in New York and drafted Andrew Thomas and drafted Dexter Lawrence. And they just have that foundational belief that the line of scrimmage is more important than the skill players. And that's why Brandon Beane, if he has to choose, is going to choose to be shorthanded at a position like wide receiver over having a situation where his swing tackle could be a very unproven Chase Lunt without any kind of competition for that spot. All right, now Luka, this is where it started to get fun, because I was starting to think like, oh God, if they don't take a receiver soon, I am just going to lose my mind, because there was really only one or two receivers left on the board that really interested me. But the one they got is a guy I would have been just fine with the pick they traded up for in the second round, would have been over the moon if they had stayed put in the third round. And with their first pick in the fourth round, the Bills come out and they draft Skyler Bell. And then with the next pick, they draft Caleb Alarms, or the linebacker. 2 for 2. I don't think fans are ever like 100% in favor of anything, but if you want to talk about like fans, the majority of fans just automatically going, okay, now I see the vision. Skyler Bell, let's start with him. I think he is exactly what this team needs. Not only is he a guy that can get deep, but he's a guy that he runs good routes. He has very good contested catch ability despite having a sleeker frame. I heard the Devonta Smith comparison in that regard, and that makes a lot of sense to me. He's a guy that's really good catch and run. I mean, you saw a ton of screens his direction at UConn. The way UConn ran their offense with Skyler Bell, it was almost like watching somebody play Madden with like the Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson, Detroit Lions. And it doesn't matter what the route concept is. I'm just going to hit Calvin Johnson's button and throw it to him. They peppered him with all kinds of targets. And I just think this is a guy that I'm not even trying to be like fan that just wants every draft pick to be great. I would be stunned if he's not a top 3 receiver on the Bills by the end of the season.
I wouldn't be stunned if he's number 1 on the Bills by the end of the season. Let me just be emphatically clear. I think Skyler Bell could be Stephon Diggs 2.0. I think everything about his game just screams it. I think he's got everything you want when it comes to being a complete receiver while also still being exceptional at a couple things. I think the knock on Skyler Bell, the knock on him is the fact that, one, playing at UConn, which take that for what it is. I don't believe that that's something that really, I think we're in a day and age now that I would like to believe that scouts don't hold that over people, other than the obvious of they could have potentially played against better competition. And we fall victim of that too. And he had his chance on top of it to play at a more premier team at Wisconsin early in his career. It did not work out, if you want to call it that. He did have one decent year when it was like 30 for 400 and 5 touchdowns or something like that at Wisconsin.
And he was there when Jim Leonard was there, and that was important.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So there's a common knowledge there as well. But what I will say is you put on that tape of his 2 years at UConn, and obviously more specifically this final season, and it's incredibly difficult to not find something new with every rep that you're like, that's special. That's awesome. There's this. And then the icing on the cake to me, Josh, when it comes to players like this is, I don't hold a lot of value in, I hold value, but not a lot of value in like your typical draft analysis from a lot of like the draft expert people and things like that. The people I do hold value a little bit more in and stuff like that are former players, athletes, individuals that coach players. And I think Josh knows where I'm going with this. Steve Smith Sr. put out a whole hit piece on Skyler Bell, and Steve Smith Sr. was basically gushing over this individual and said, he wasn't saying he sees him and him. They're not like for like. There's no one like Steve Smith Sr. Let's be quite frank. But he loved everything about his game and some. And then Skyler Bell out there saying basically Steve Smith Sr. was his favorite receiver growing up, and that's who he idolized, and that's who he appreciated at the position. If you get a Steve Smith Sr. on this roster, I mean, by the end of this season, if he can truly hit the ground running, his ceiling could potentially be number 1 on this team. Realistically, what Josh said is a very much more, we'll call it based and understanding approach to it where, hey, he's going to be in the top 3 mix. He's going to be a quality target for this team, things like that. But to find someone that universally is liked in the manner that he is in the 4th round, and on top of it feels like he could be an impact out the gate individual on day 3 in the 4th round, that is very hard to find. It's the ultimate gem when it comes to the combination of both being a quality player that can out the gates help you, but then also develop into something truly special. That I do not say this lightly. I hate comparisons, but I look at Skyler Bell, and every time you watch him, it's like this guy can be, as obviously familiar as it sounds, this guy can be that Diggs-like impact on this offense. He's got a lot of those tools in him. And don't forget, Diggs was not an early draft pick in himself. So it's like you find guys like that, Antonio Browns, you find individuals like that sometimes at this point in the draft. And Skyler Bell can easily be someone that, looking back, everyone's like, how in the fuck did this guy fall to late 4th round? And I can't stop gushing over it. And then on top of it all, just the beautiful cherry on top is, turns out he's a big hockey fan.
Yeah, he sure is.
And it's like, holy shit, what? And he's, I mean, you want to talk about winning points. He's been on the Bills roster for 1 day, and he's already rooting for the Sabres and shit. I was like, this guy needs to be wearing a gold jacket. Like, let's do everything we can for this guy. I can't love him anymore. 11 out of 10 grade, like unbelievable pick. And I'm so happy that Beane decided to pull the trigger on him when he did, and was able to get him when he was, that gushing over the moon on that pick. That I honestly, I don't know if we were supposed to also talk about Caleb Alarms. Or
no, we can get into him next.
Yeah, but man, Skyler Bell, what a talent and gem of a find later in the 4th round that Beane had fall into his lap essentially. And I mean, I liked Bryce Lance, who was still there. I liked a couple other guys, Reggie Virgil, who would have felt a little bit more redundant and not really necessary, but I still kind of liked his game. But the fact that Skyler Bell was there and we actually took him is like, holy shit, this is real now.
I also, when you mentioned Lance, I liked Lance too. I was convinced the Bills would prefer Lance over Skyler Bell. Do you remember when they took Justin Shorter and their big selling point was, this guy's a demon on special teams coverage?
Yeah.
Lance is a demon on special teams coverage. Now he's got ability. I think he's going to have a good career. If he, I'm not trying to say anything negative about him, but it was actually a deep sigh of relief for me that the Bills looked at it and said, no. We're looking for wide receiver skill set. We'll figure out 4th down when it gets to 4th down. And I don't really know Skyler Bell's contributions as, like kickoff coverage. I would be surprised if there's much. But I'm so happy that the Bills didn't do the Justin Shorter over Puka Nacua thing, where it's like, we got to win 4th down.
Yeah, and I'll even add on top of it, my favorite thing about this to even stack on is we didn't hear anything about it. We like what this guy can provide in the blocking game. We like what this individual can do, in helping with the run blocking game and stuff like that. And if there's truly an actual blemish to this guy's, profile, he's not exactly a willing blocker. He's not known for his ability to be a run blocker. It's a pretty poor grade if you look on anyone that even tries to put a metric to it. And I couldn't be happier about that. We do not need a receiver in here where it's like, he's okay as a receiver, but boy, he can get hands on frame. He can control DBs, and you're going to love it when runs bounce outside and he's still controlling that block. It's like, I would sure love a guy who's got 2 hands and is capable of making every catch while also creating separation. I'd really love that too on this team, which we do not seem to have at this moment in time. And I would say that only because we haven't seen DJ Moore in a Bills uniform yet. So the Skyler Bell pick is just, it went, as I talked about, IGB felt like, is McDermott still the head coach on this team? Skyler Bell was the first moment, Josh, in my opinion, where I was like, this is not a McDermott team. It's a
new day.
This is a new organization. We are doing things differently. And obviously both of us were very much for it.
The last thing I'll say, you brought up Diggs, and I got a lot of Diggs vibes watching him too. And one of my new favorite traits of receivers, and this is kind of petty, but this was a hallmark of Diggs. If you're a boundary receiver, depending on what quarter it is, you're going to be running routes either next to your team on their sideline or next to the opposing team on their sideline. And Diggs is notorious for making his most beastly contested catches right in the face of the other team and then getting up and chirping at everybody on the other sideline. You don't have to watch very long Skyler Bell highlights before you realize he's got that exact same trait. He makes a circus catch, and it's always happening when he's on the other team's sideline, and he gets up and lets them know about it. And look, I get it. Like, why do we have to do that? I'm sorry of the Buffalo Bills need more jerks. And I'm not calling them a jerk, but they need more guys that are good. They know they're good and don't mind telling you that they're good. And this guy seems to get a little oomph from having a sideline of opposing players be like, you're not going to catch that. And he gets up and be like, the hell I'm not. And letting them all know. So I hear you on the Diggs vibes, and the smaller frame, contested catches, and the smoothness of the route running. Yeah. Every ball in the air, it feels like he takes personal that you're going to try to take from him. I get it. I'd love it if, obviously, what is this to say? I would love it if he became Stephon Diggs. Okay, and then with the very next pick, the Bills took another player that we were both very high on, Caleb Alarms Orr from TCU. Now, not the most polished player, new to the sport of football, actually, but a ridiculous athlete that projects to the NFL as both an inside backer, but also an inside backer that can blitz and has the athleticism while still not necessarily super strong in coverage, probably due to some of the lack of experience he has at the position, has the athleticism to grow into that. I just think he is the perfect body to add to that room with Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams. I do not think this will prevent the Bills from going out and signing a Bobby Okereke or somebody like that, or Shaq Thompson, but just the perfect type of player to throw into that mix and just see where he fits. And the fact that he is such a good blitzer and the fact that he is such a good pass rusher for a middle linebacker just makes me drool at what the Bills think they saw in him and what Jim Leonhard already has in his mind cooking up for this kid. Just an absolute home run of a pick, and made me feel so much better about the Bills spending a 4th round pick on a linebacker, even though there were some guys that went earlier that I love. I love Trotter out of Mizzou. Did not want him with the first pick in the 2nd round. I'm glad that the Bills did this, got a player like this in the 4th round, and I think that they are well insulated now should Terrell Bernard come back and just not get that step back that we hoped he would have, or Dorian Williams cannot handle being an every down starter. I think this kid gives them a lot of juice.
Yeah, Caleb is going to be this is going to start the trend of the draft picks. When I was again, it's continuing the trend actually, because we talked about the Skyler Bell like new regime. This continues that thought process, but this introduces a second phase to it where it's like, oh, we're going for athletes without the coach, without the things you can coach, right? You're going with the raw talent things that you can't coach. And it's like your flags or your problems with this player are things and items that you should then be able to mold and coach and develop and do whatever it is. You can't develop 4.4 speed. You can develop ability to play pass coverage. And like what's my favorite note about Caleb? And I just want it on record. I saw somewhere, and I'm reading it verbatim here. It was the funniest thing I ever read on a profile, just when it comes to a player like this, especially because fast downhill runner, as he said, great in pass blitz and stuff. You want to talk about his pass coverage and zone coverage being a problem and everything like that. 1 interception in nearly across 1,900 career defensive snaps is a red flag for ball production when it comes to coverage abilities. It's like, yeah, yes, that would be, that's an alarm. That's a problem. But also, you know what that is? Coachable. That you can teach this individual how to be better in coverage. And the great thing about great athletes is they are generally coachable. They want to learn. They want to be better. They want to continue to get better. They want to develop as a player because they also know the better they can get at a lot of things puts more dollars and cents in their pocket to continue to do this thing that they love the most. So I was all for drafting a Caleb Alarms Orr and seeing what you got, because you just drafted a sub 4.5 linebacker who still is incredible. I saw the vert was a 40 even, which I was like, Holy shit. That is some serious hops. Also, again, how the hell are you not breaking up passes if you can jump that effing high? But overall, it's like you have this raw athlete now, a little bit undersized, but again, still raw athlete who has freak traits to him. And now all you need to do is coach him up and figure it out. But even on top of it, early on, you can still get some quality usage out of him, and it just early on, the downhill ability and just finding the ball carrier, blitzing the passer, stuff like that. You can do a lot of fun things still where you get that instant impact on top of it, where you can get more game time and learning and understanding to the overall picture of how to play the position that eventually, hopefully, he can develop into something greater. That I immediately picture him being, an ILB next to Dorian Williams. And now the guy under center has to figure out who the F is going to be charging into his face in about a millisecond. So when you picture that idea of those two charging bulls just sitting there waiting to kill you, and they are great athletes at doing it, that's pretty exciting stuff, Josh. I think that's a quality pick and a quality individual to somehow fall in your lap right after drafting potentially Stephon Diggs 2.0. So, I think another potential home run pick, but for now, I'll just call it a very, very good quality pick at this moment in time.
So we just raved about Bell. We raved about Alarms and we still haven't gotten to my favorite pick of the Bills. And we're not going to spend as long on the next few guys, but I do want to talk about what the Bills did in the 5th round, which was they got somebody. He's one of my favorite players in all of college football. I mean, one, if you play the college football video game, he's a cheat code in that game because of his ridiculous athleticism. They got the cornerback / safety out of South Carolina, Jalen Kilgore. And I had tweeted this out 20 minutes before the Bills picked him. If you want to roll the dice at this point on just a freakish athlete that has tons of competitiveness and just needs to be molded, Jalen Kilgore is your guy. Luka, he is as close to a 10 on the RAS score as you can get. He can jump out of the gym. He's a ridiculous athlete. I got to watch a lot of South Carolina this season. They're just a team that I was crushing on for whatever reason. They ultimately did not have a good season. But what I can tell you is Kilgore played a lot of nickel. I don't think that's where his home is going to be in the NFL. It's interesting because he has the athleticism. I think if he develops better technique to turn his hips quicker, but right now he feels kind of stiff despite his athleticism. And I think he can get eaten up by good route running receivers, which is all you will see in the slot in the NFL. I think in a lot of ways, he might be a matchup specific nickel, where if a team plays a lot of a tight end, like say like an Isaiah Likely, if you're playing the Giants and he's lining up in the slot, like there's a guy that you could match up on him and feel good about the size. I think his home in the NFL is going to be safety, probably more of that box safety, but maybe you never know. At the very least, I think the Bills just found themselves the next Saran Neal, who is just going to be a special teams demon, an attitude guy, a guy that can come in and get you out of a game at slot corner and safety if need be. But the upside here, I love the fact that they swung big, and the tape may not be great at times. That there's times where you're like, man, this guy is going to get eaten up by good route runners. The potential though, and what the Bills could do with him, with Jim Leonard and their new cornerback coach, Jay Valai, who is getting rave reviews. I love the fact they're giving these guys just this mold of clay and see what you can build. There were people that had him as a 2nd round prospect, and the Bills got him in the 5th round. You and I were through the roof on this one.
Yeah, supreme athlete, right? He's an individual that when you watched him play at South Carolina, you better get used to listening to this school and hearing the same phrase over and over and over again. Supremely elite athlete. There has to be at least 20 individuals on that Cox team that is just a monster athlete at whatever their respective position is. And that goes even to quarterback with Sellers, who's going to be coming up in next year's draft. And boy, I cannot wait for that draft coverage. Even though we don't need a quarterback, Josh, he might be one of my first drool-worthy quarterbacks in potential that we will be able to profile in Bills Chat history. But Kilgore is just an unreal supreme athlete that I think we share a thought immensely on the fact of his ideal landing spot will be box safety, strong safety, things like that, where you want to utilize him to create that, that vibe of, you can call him big safety. I mean, he's heavy. I think he's listed at 210 pounds for a DB, is very sizable, but only 6'1", still big, but not as big as, 6'4", 6'5", not a wham bam cam kind of guy. But he's a big safety, small linebacker vibe that can absolutely fly around, and 130 broad jump, 4.4 even, clean combine 40 time. Like, you look at all those things, you're drooling at the mouth, and then you watch his tape and you're like, he's overrunning everything. He's swing tackling, he's just wrapping around and whipping himself outside of the frame to tackle, which inadvertently, unfortunately, means he's missing a lot of tackles. But again, just like we talked about with the previous pick, these are coachable things. These are things you can hopefully bring him in and make him learn and understand and do things to mold him into what you want him to be. That, yeah, I'm with you in the idea of hopefully he can be an impact guy at special teams. I mean, you see an athlete like that, you're like, holy effing shit, please be a good special teamer, because you could even make massively impactful plays on special teams being that size and speed and everything like that. But if you start picking up the defensive side of things and you start understanding what you need to do from a safety perspective, or even at your nickel, depending on the package situation, the ceiling on him for a 5th round pick is crazy high, in my opinion. That I think the only reason he's falling this is, a little bit stiff with shifty guys, gets grabby, the typical things that someone who just used their raw athleticism to get by all of a sudden starts playing skilled players across from him. And it's like, oh, it's not catching up clearly right there. But once you get to the NFL and you have the best of best coaching involved, hopefully you can kind of flip some switches, make them understand certain things, get those things finely tuned. And next thing you know, you have like a 5 times better version of Taylor Rapp out there, being an absolute freak monster, flying around at your strong safe position, doing everything you can to just be a dominant force paired up with Bishop. That's the ceiling you have with an individual that somehow fell to you into the 5th round. That loved everything about this one. I would probably even call this my 2nd favorite pick of the draft, just behind Skyler Bell. Skyler Bell, he'll probably be my favorite draft pick in the past 4 seasons, as long as he tracks the way he should. But yeah, I love everything about the Kilgore one and stuff like that. I think it made all the sense in the world. And if it doesn't work out and he's just a special teamer, guess what? You didn't have to use, a 3rd round pick to find an athlete like this. You used a 5th, and that's still quality. If you have a 4-year player at any position on any phase of the game, that is a quality pick. That's a win overall at this moment in time once you're in the 5th.
And then with another 5th round pick, back to the defensive line, Brandon Beane selects Zane Durant, defensive tackle out of Penn State. This was a classic case, Brandon Beane said, of just best player on the board, sticking out, really not in need. In fact, he's not going to be that nose tackle. He's much more of a 4-eye or a 5 technique, in the similar mold of like an Ed Oliver / TJ Sanders role. Luka, this was just maybe he will make the roster. He probably will, but the fact that we have him graded so much higher than everybody else, at this point, we just got to take him. I think there's a real chance that he makes the roster because he has a pretty unique skill set.
Yeah, unique skill set. And once again, just another in that line and stretch I brought up, starting with the linebacker, going into Kilgore, and then from here, linebacker Kilgore, I should say his effing name, going into Zane Durant. It's like, you want to talk about supreme athlete that just is a little bit more raw in the skill side of stuff that you can coach. It's like 4.75 40 as a man that lists at 290 pounds, a 10-yard split for what it's worth. That was in the 92 percentile at 166, and then still also had a vert of 33.5. Just an incredible athlete, especially in the lower half, that you also watch his relentlessness and his tape and his ability to rush the passer. You're like, again, a 5th round pick at 21 years old with the things you can't coach now coming out that you like. What's to not like about this guy and this pick overall? That I'll take a great athlete at whatever their respective position is, that then you need to figure out and coach from there all day long on day 3.
All right, we're going to blow through here the 7th round pick. The Bills had 3 7th round picks. I do want to say this. Brandon Beane has said in the past that he likes to trade down on day 3 and accumulate as many 7th round picks as he can. In fact, at one point in time, he moved down and got a 7th round pick in the 2027 draft. So that will be added onto the pile of picks they'll have next year. His reason for that it makes sense to me, is once you get to the 6th and 7th round, these teams are still focused on drafting, 6, 7, but they're also starting to make calls to agents about players that they think are going to go undrafted and already starting to recruit those guys as undrafted free agents. Brandon Beane likes having as many picks in the 7th round as possible because let's say this next guy we're talking about, Torino Pride from Mizzou, is a guy that the Bills really wanted to recruit as an undrafted free agent. And their agent says, we'd like to go to Buffalo, but you just drafted Max Harrison last year. We saw you took IGB in the 2nd round. We just don't see a super good path to making your roster. Brandon Beane says, okay, cool. We're going to take you in the draft. And guess what? You're on our team. It gives you an option. When you are a good team, you are a less attractive landing spot for undrafted free agents because their entire goal is to go somewhere where you can make a squad. I'll hit quickly on Torino Pride Jr. because he plays in my neck of the woods, Mizzou. Highly thought of, competitive kid, good athlete. I don't think he plays to the 4.4 that he ran on his RAS score. I have that here. I think he actually ran. Yeah, he ran a 4.32. That is not accurate with how he plays. I think he's probably like a 4.45 kind of player. But good size. He's 5'10", 185. So, and not the strongest kid in the world, but I think it's another flyer to add speed to your DB room. Maybe he hangs on in the practice squad, but the Bills not only lost Tre'Davious White, but there is a big question mark right now with what's going to happen with the future of Dorian Strong. So I thought the Bills had the appetite to add 2 corners in this draft. They really added 3, depending on what you think of Kilgore. Totally on board with this pick. Luka, the Bills then went back to the well of picking a punter, and they got out of the University of Florida, much to the dismay of Syracuse fans, Tommy Doman Jr. Look, if you draft a punter, I think it's pretty clear you think he's going to be your punter. All due respect to Mitch Wisniewski. I think Tommy Doman Jr. is going to be the Bills' new kicker and our punter, and he also kicked off in college too.
Yeah, I can't wait for the punt off stories that come out of the off season. We get to hear how a punt off went between Tommy Domain and Wisniewski, and it's going to be interesting. When I saw the Pride Junior pick, I was just like, yep, another corner to just add and see what you got in there, but also seeing that little 4.32 40 on there, regardless if he plays it or not, at some point in time, he ran a 4.32 and it's like, we could use speed. That's fine. And then you look up his profile too, and everything about it was like, this guy seems like he's a track guy that then all of a sudden, if he has to put his foot in the ground and do anything else, it's very slow. And what I think is really funny about that, not to make fun of the individual and stuff like that, but to have a combine 40 of 4.32, and yet your 3-cone drill is a 7.2, also known as the 9th percentile. It's like, boy, that tells me you do not get off of your feet very
You're
often.
a little linear.
So that is an interesting little thing, but it's a 7th round pick. Like, why not take a shot on someone like that? Hey, he tested high in the 4 and the 40. That is what the 40-yard dash is for. Is for these random individuals that, they're not on anyone's radar, let's be honest. And all of a sudden it's like eye-opening. It's like 4.32. Like, let's put him at the bottom of the board here. If he's floating around there in the 7th, why not take a dart throw on him? And then, as you said, even though it's a 7th round pick, you draft a punter. The expectation is he should be coming in. And I do love the caveat too of he's also been known as a kickoff specialist. And I think when it comes to place kicking for the Bills, I do prefer now seeing what we had with Prater last season. I would much more prefer my kickoff specialist moving forward to not be the place kicker, so that you have an individual who can focus solely on that one trait and not be worried about the other thing. So regardless where the place kicking goes from here, that individual is on this roster just to do one thing and one thing only. And then your kickoff duties and everything else can be on the shoulders of your punter, who can kind of handle that load. And it's a much less pressure position in comparison. So, yeah, I like that, making that pick. And then even just a little caveat on top with not being the last pick, but the last pick being a guard out of A&M. Don't know a lick about him, but adding another, in all the respect, fatty to the roster doesn't hurt. And, when it comes to being a guard on top of it, if he can all of a sudden show something random, that's great, because guard is going to be a position, as we talked about earlier, potentially that we have a need for moving forward.
There's a path to this roster for a guard for sure. So it makes sense top to bottom. The Bills Finished up this draft with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players, including not including DJ Moore. Recouped that pick. I thought it was a masterful draft by Brandon Beane. Who knows how these guys will turn out, but a lot of quantity, a lot of depth. And then just want to mention that a couple interesting undrafted free agents that they've brought in. John Fina's son is going to be here. Tylen Grable's cousin is going to be here. It's a family affair. And then interesting story came out on Sunday. Former third-round pick out of Alabama, who would have been picked much higher if not for a bunch of off-field concerns, including like hitting a fan. Jermaine Burton, wide receiver, is going to be joining the Bills for rookie minicamp, and he's a guy that was drafted by the Bengals, couldn't stick on there, apparently had some like gambling issues and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
was not a great person also in meeting rooms, I've heard, but
yeah. And the reality is he probably won't make it, but
yeah,
we've seen this before with someone like a Chase Claypool. You just never know what moment of your life you'll realize that it's time to grow up. And if the Bills happen to be here giving him a reprieve after he thought his dreams were crushed and all of a sudden he's ready to be a professional, the Bills could strike gold. If Jermaine Burton shows up and there's just no athleticism left in the tank, or he's just not a professional, then they've lost nothing but one minicamp invite. All right, Luka, we're going to get out of here. Truly, like, the next few episodes are probably going to just be more in-depth about the roster. We'll get to that, but I love the run up to the draft. I love all the work we did on the draft. I love all the behind the scenes work you did in getting the live draft show done. It's one of our favorite weeks of the year. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I can't wait to just be locked in, not as if I wasn't already, on Sabres playoff hockey, and that we will be getting, most likely, knock on all the wood in the world, even more so after this Boston series wraps up, hopefully on Tuesday. And also shout out another guy coming into minicamp, Prince Dorba out of Arizona State. He is coming in as an edge player. I will be rooting very hard for an individual that will, in all likelihood, not make the roster. But yeah, just I love everything about it. I love the draft, as we talk about all the time. And, we'll be looking forward to the wind down off season stretch that we're in. We will obviously keep you posted on X, or I say we, Josh will keep you posted on X and things like that. And we look forward to an off season, because next thing you know, it'll be July. We're talking about who's coming in at training camp. Josh Allen will show up in shorts, and everyone will be so excited about that it'll be fall time, and we'll be enjoying every Sunday watching Bills football along with everything else. Boy, I can't talk. But first and foremost, go Sabres.
It goes by quick. The training camp will be here before you know it, particularly if the hockey season goes, 3 more rounds? That would be fantastic. For Luka, I am Josh McCarty. Go Sabres, go Bills, and we will talk to you next time on Bills Chat.